It's my pleasure now to introduce a pioneering thinker in business and sustainability and the architect of the environmental profit and loss statement, which attaches economic value to a corporation's environmental impacts. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jochen Zeitz.
Hi.
Hello. Don't worry, I won't quiz you on your chair. Different kind of chair. Well, it's great having you here, and I have to say this is a little bit coming full circle for me because my first journalism job was the footwear reporter at Sporting Goods Business Magazine. So I covered the sneaker industry, and so PUMA, you were there at the time, and now here we are again. It's
a lot younger than that, though. Yeah.
Well, both of us were, but that's okay, and there's a certain symmetry to it. So anyway, but your role now is much bigger than footwear. You have, just to give the audience a little bit of an idea of what your arc has been here. You took PUMA from $200 million when you were under 30 years old, grew it into $4 billion, and then a couple years ago, stepped back to take on a bigger role at PUMA's parent company, PPR, now called Kering. You are the head of the Sustainability Development Committee and a director, and you are also a major champion of getting corporations to be more sustainable. So can you tell us first a little bit about what prompted you to kind of step away from that operating role, CEO of a company, to take on this bigger role? What was the sort of awakening, to use that word, that you had?
Well, having been CEO for 20 years and realizing at some point that I could only do so much to make my business sustainable within a framework that was clearly defined as short-termism. No matter how long you were thinking as a businessman, it always came down back to your quarterly performance. I felt that I could contribute first by trying to make our business more sustainable, innovating within the business, but then move on to do greater things in order to help to actually change the framework that holds us as businessmen and women back to actually become more sustainable.
Was there a point in time where you suddenly started paying attention to this? Or, I mean, at age 29, when you took over the company, was this on your mind then, or did it emerge over the years as you kind of saw what was going on?
No, I mean, it took some time. I'd say probably more than 10 years for me to figure it out. In fact, I remember my deputy at the time, he wanted to hire an environmental expert, and I said, we don't have money for that. That was in the first year of me being CEO, because I just, the company was bankrupt. We didn't have the money to do that. And over time, I realized that the system was just not working, that governments were not doing what I thought they should do, and I realized that business was actually part of the problem and didn't deliver the solution. So I tried to innovate within the business, but I felt that at some point I needed to step not out of the system, but scale it in a bigger form by moving the operational responsibility to somebody else and innovating on a bigger scale.
One of the things you've done, as I mentioned, is create this concept of an environmental profit and loss statement. Tell us a little bit about that. What is it? What's the point? How does it work? Just give us a little bit of overview of
Well, we heard earlier about valuing natural capital, and that's basically what it does. The P&L puts a monetary value on your environmental impacts. So for PUMA it was, and for Kering, it is mostly land use, air pollution, waste, carbon, and water.
But it's like an audit. You have a partner that comes in and will, almost as if Ernst & Young is auditing your financial results. Is that how it works?
Yeah, we had two partners, Trucost and PwC, and they were actually looking at the impacts, but not just within our own operations, but actually expanded it throughout the entire supply chain. And the surprising bit was for us that our biggest impacts, actually 76% of our impacts, happened furthest away. The moment we decided what raw materials we were choosing and processed those raw materials, we already generated almost 2/3 of our environmental impact. So the reality is I could have made our own operations sustainable and call ourselves the most sustainable company, but the reality is we were still very unsustainable. So knowing where your impacts actually are, putting the impacts in relation to each other rather than just focusing on water or on carbon, gives you the full picture on one page. So once you know your impact, then you can go about it, and you can also look at the relative value and monetization of one input towards the other. And it's actually very simple. Once you have the data, once you've done it, and that's what we are now trying to scale in another initiative I'm working with.
So what did you learn about PUMA? What was the environmental impact deemed to be?
Well,
because
it was $145 right? Annual impact, 145 million euros. of which only 8 million or 6% were actually generated in our own operations. The rest happened outside of our direct sphere of influence, let's say, within our operations. If you took the impact of cotton, rubber, and leather, which are the three primary raw materials that we're using, that's 54% right happening at the source, at the production of the raw material. You process it, it gives you the plus 70% that I just mentioned. So if you really want to change the way you do business and make your products more sustainable or less unsustainable, you actually have to play with these three materials, either find replacement, look at recycling, upcycling, downcycling, or just find alternative materials, which I believe we ultimately need to do in order to move away from the land-based raw materials that we're utilizing today.
So the goal is to have that figure be $0 or positive.
Well, it says profit and loss, so reality is it's more of a loss, but you can of course also do positive things. You can, if you're in the extractive industry, you could rehabilitate the land you've utilized, so there can be a positive impact. You can do something about your carbon. You can offset your carbon or do actually invest into programs, which we are doing, that have a net positive effect. So while you realize that there are negative impacts that are happening, you don't have to wait until you found solution to your more sustainable or less unsustainable materials you're using. You can also do some projects that can actually help you reduce your impact. If we want to move back into planetary boundaries, net, we have to be positive because we're far outside of the planetary boundaries, and that needs to be the goal.
But as a CEO, and we have more CEOs here at this conference than ever before. So as a CEO who is responsible to Wall Street on a quarterly basis, or as Peter Seligman put out, you know, you can't, I mean, there's a reality here, and this costs money. So what is the business case for this? How is $1 invested in doing an environmental audit or a profit and loss statement going to further the bottom line? Or is it not about that?
Well, it depends on what business you're in. There's some businesses where it's never going to happen. So
you're not going to get Jamie Dimon to do this, I'm guessing.
Well, I don't know about that one, but I think you have to, you know, look at it long term. And you heard it earlier. You know, you have to have a long-term perspective. If your raw materials are reducing, you're in an industry where there's nothing around. You got to think about, you know, how we're going to look at taking those raw materials and reusing them, for example. You know, costs of raw materials are going up, so there is a business case, but it's not just about more efficiency, and that's the one thing I've learned over the years. You know, very often we talk about sustainability and say, there is the business case. There will be a business case for a lot of businesses, but they're the innovative businesses that actually find sustainable solutions to our problems. But there's a vast amount of businesses that will have to invest. Just like in everything in business, you have to invest first in order to reap the benefits in the future. So I believe sustainability, true sustainability, when you really look at your impacts, in most cases will require investment. And that's what's really holding us back, because that's not something that Wall Street really wants to hear. But that story just needs to be told. And for that reason, we actually have to move away from our single bottom line to something that's more inclusive.
So that's why, so people would rather hear, oh, this makes business sense too, when really you think it doesn't right now.
Well, it depends on how do you define the business case. It makes you know, little business sense from a traditional bottom line perspective. Short-termism, if you think long-term, it may make a lot of sense for a lot of businesses. And there's also, you know, you can also save money. But the reality is, you know, the true impacts require true innovation, and that is usually coming with investment. And that's why we need to move away from our short-term thinking. And that's why, you know, we're starting the B team, which we are going to launch in a couple of months.
Tell us a little bit about that. This is a new venture with Richard Branson called the B team. Why didn't you call it the A team?
Because there's an A team that looks very different to Richard and I already.
So tell us a little bit about it. What is the purpose of this? It's a sort of council of advisors, a global council of leaders, yet to be announced.
Yet to be announced. Well, we decided that it was time for business to step forward and be a positive force in the world and try to contribute to business, you know, rather than always complaining why certain things don't happen. We want to be leaders that are ultimately trying to help scale great ideas that are already out there, amplify some wonderful initiatives that are already going on, as well as you know, pushing some things to the tipping point that we think are critical. P&L being one example, social P&L being another. So we have a dozen of business leaders that have come together, that have already done great things in their business lives, not just in their private lives. I think it's going to be a great group that can do good things.
And is taking the environmental P&L out with this group, is that part of the plan too?
That will be part of the plan, because if you don't know your impacts, you can't really talk about sustainability. In the 2 years since we've launched the ePNL, I haven't really seen anything that's much better or coming even close. So scaling that, and to my surprise, there's nobody that has come forward and done an ePNL and admitted what the impact is, which is a bit surprising to me. So we want to change that.
Have they done it, but just they're not revealing the impact?
Yeah, there are more and more companies doing the ePNL, which is great. Some of them are saying, well, now I know my impact, but I don't really know what to do about it, so I'd rather not publish it. Or others have such a big impact that they are too scared to talk about it. But I think more and more companies will come out, and at some point it needs to become a standard.
What about operating in the luxury goods industry? I mean, people buy products for all sorts of reasons in that business. I mean, what were your findings there at other divisions of PPR, now Kering? What was the, I guess, biggest offender, I guess, in the environmental profit and loss? And
I think what's important is that the word sustainability ultimately goes away, and you don't really need to talk about it anymore, because it becomes part of the DNA of your business. And once you have actually explained it in that sense, then it makes sense. In luxury, we are saying luxury is about quality, it's about craftsmanship, longevity. So when you talk about those values, that's luxury. And that means if you're not sustainable long term, you cannot be great quality. And that differentiates the luxury brands down the road from the fast turnaround brands, the mass market brands that do not manufacture in high cost countries, but in low cost countries that do not have a long term perspective. So I think you turn the values of sustainability into something that the luxury brand can relate to. And we have one brand in our portfolio, Stella McCartney, who doesn't use leather in her products, but she doesn't talk about sustainability. She just says, this is my belief, I'm doing this, it's good for the environment, it's good for the human being, and it's certainly good for animals. And I think that's how we have to look at it. And another company, I'm on the board of Harley-Davidson, you could say, well, what does make a motorbike sustainable? But there are great ways to actually integrate the brand values and sustainability into the brand values without ever having to talk about sustainability.
Mm-hmm. And there's other divisions of Kering that use a lot of leather. I mean, you have to deal with the realities of each business.
Yeah, absolutely, and it'll take time. There are ways to do it. Leather is, problematic. You can make leather less unsustainable. I would say you can probably never make it sustainable unless you, breed it somewhere in the incubator. But that is an issue, and that's why, for example, Stella doesn't use leather. But other brands are doing something about it. And luxury, at least, you can have a bag that has a second and a third life, and you can find them in thrift stores. It's not something you throw into the waste bin at some point. So there are intrinsic benefits of luxury, but now the luxury business really needs to take it and turn it into a value that the consumer also understands.
Is the point that the consumer understands the concept of the environmental profit and loss statement, or is that just sort of?
No, definitely not. But luxury certainly understands social values, because that's where the luxury consumer is actually very active. So on a social side, there's already a great awareness when it comes to donations and helping businesses to invest into social causes, and the same needs to happen in the environment. I'm using the example of calories on a cereal box. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't worry about calories. And now, whenever we consume something, we're looking for calories. But calories in themselves, are a summary of different ingredients. If we can one day come to a metric that allows us to actually value the environment and put environmental calories to our products, we as consumers can now actually compare one product to another. When we get to that point, you make the choice. If the price is the same or even a little bit higher, you take the product that is less damaging to the environment. And I think that consciousness we need to create, so the consumer will play a very important role in changing that paradigm.
I know I think we have somebody in the audience with a strong point of view on this topic. Let's get a perspective from Mark Hawkins, Executive Vice President and CFO of Autodesk. Mark.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you doing? Hopefully good.
Thanks for being here.
First of all, I appreciate the chance to surface a question. Let me just give you a little background about Autodesk. We are a leader in the world with 3D engineering software for designers across industries. And so some of what these people do is they use our tools to design more sustainable solutions. So we very much embrace sustainability. And we've been on a journey, and I'm very interested, Jochen, in learning more about yours. We have very much embraced the theme of green equals green, and that's been very helpful to us. We try to run our operations globally with sustainability. We're still trying to keep learning and getting better. And then our products, as I said, are very focused on helping our designers hopefully design a better world. I guess my question for you is a single one. You have quite some experience in that you're sharing with us. I'm interested in understanding for people that want to get traction and further advance their maturity as a global company in sustainability, I want to understand your personal learning on the single most important thing to consider for each of us as we walk away to try to advance the maturity of our company, both to do and not to do.
Well, I think it depends on the business, really. There's some businesses where it's a little easier because your solutions will help to make the world better and more sustainable. But what I've learned is it comes down to passion, energy, leadership, and really just sticking with it and believe. And that's something that drove me in my business life. I always did things that nobody wanted to touch, it was always against the odds. And I think you have to kind of be an adventurer and somebody who wants to really change things for the better in order to ultimately accomplish it. And I think that's what it takes in sustainability. A lot of CEOs are saying today, I think the latest studies show the majority think that they have really embraced sustainability. And I'm sure, all of you in the room, you can also, you've experienced it on a day-to-day basis, what it takes, how much conviction it takes. But to really tackle the essential issues of sustainability and changing it is something within the current framework of doing business is not easy. And that's why we've started the B team to shed a light on it, to stop the negative lobbying that prevents good laws to be passed, to promote the good laws, set up good incentives that will help us as business leaders or anybody in working in business to actually promote a new way of doing business. But ultimately right now I'd say it takes a lot of dedication and commitment, and then just measure your impact and get everybody to become truly aware of where businesses are or your particular businesses, and then try and find solutions step by step.
We're going to need to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, for being here all the way from Germany. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.